Before we jump into the episode today, I want to share something with you from my heart. First of all, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I really can't tell you how much your support means to me. We've been doing the podcast now for almost 4 years. I can't even believe it. And I'm so grateful for each and every single one of you that listens, shares an episode with your friends, sends me a DM or a text message letting me know how an episode resonated with you or any aha moments. Seriously, I couldn't be more grateful to be able to create this podcast. It has been such a blessing in my life, and I love hearing the ways it's been able to provide value in yours as well. One thing you might not know is how much work it takes to be consistent with a podcast. In fact, did you know that the majority of podcasts don't make it past episode number 10? And we are well beyond that. And it's just a lot thinking of the episodes, recording them, editing them, managing the guests, making sure that everything runs smoothly and gets uploaded consistently and regularly. And so that's why I have created an amazing opportunity for you to support the podcast monetarily. And in exchange for that, you will get exclusive premium subscriber content. So for as little as $3 a month, you can become a premium subscriber of the podcast. And every month I will upload new voice-guided workouts and breathwork meditation audio for you. So that way you can work out with me, coaching you in your ears. You can also take a moment to reduce your stress and relax and come down and ground down with one of my breathwork audios. So if that is on your heart to support the podcast for as little as $3 a month to become a premium podcast subscriber, I can't tell you how much that means to me and the growth of this podcast. I appreciate you. If you're interested, click the link in the description, become a premium podcast subscriber, new content every month, and while supplies last, I'll send you an exclusive podcast coffee mug so you can have your self-love and sweat coffee every morning. I appreciate you. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to Self-Love and Sweat, the podcast, the place where you'll get inspired to live your life unapologetically, embrace your perfect imperfections, break down barriers, and do what sets your soul on fire. I'm your host, Lunden Souza. Hey, have you grabbed your free Self-Love and Sweat monthly calendar yet? This calendar is so amazing. It comes right in your inbox every single month to help you have a little nugget of wisdom, a sweaty workout, a mindset activity, just a little something to help keep you focused and motivated and keep that momentum towards your goals. So every day when you get this calendar, you'll see a link that you can click that will lead to a podcast episode or a workout or something that will be very powerful and quick to read. And then you'll also see on the top left corner of every single day, there's a little checkbox in the calendar. And what that is that's for your one thing. You can choose one thing every month, or it can be the same, something that you want to implement, and make this something that you can easily implement, like daily meditation or getting a certain amount of steps or water, for example, and staying hydrated, and even taking your supplements. This can be something if you want to get more regular doing a particular habit and routine, you can choose what that checkbox means. So if you want your Self-Love and Sweat free monthly calendar delivered right to your inbox every month on the first of the month, go to lifelikelunden.com/calendar, fill out the form really quickly, and you will have your calendar in your inbox within a few short minutes. That's lifelikelunden, lifelikelunden.com/calendar. Go get yours for free and enjoy this episode. Happy today. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're talking about conscious conversations. And today I have 8 tips for you, or as I would call them, like speed bumps, to help you become more conscious in conversation. Oftentimes our communication, the way we talk, the way that we respond can just be on autopilot, or like if you're driving on cruise control. And the way that we communicate will always be the way that we communicate until we choose to bring awareness to it and choose to communicate more consciously. And conscious communication, conscious conversations, that's one of my favorite topics of all time because I just love understanding more of my communication patterns, where they might have come from, where I might have completely dropped the ball and completely messed up, and areas I can improve and become more conscious. I love researching this topic. I can totally geek out on words and communication and conversation. And I also love talking with people, having conversations about the tough conversations. I love when people will share like, oh, I need to have this tough conversation with my boss or my partner or my coworker or somebody that I love. And here's how I want to say it. What do you think? And I love those conversations a lot. I love holding space for practicing the conversations because that's really powerful and really important. And a big part to consciously conversating is like being able to practice ahead of time. And I love getting messages like this from my clients. And I recently got a couple last week where they reached out to me, some of my clients I work with one-on-one, and they're like, oh my gosh, I had the tough conversation. I said the thing that I've been wanting to say, and it wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be, or I wasn't as nervous or anxious going into that conversation. And so I freaking love that because we are communicating, or let's say we are talking and conversating all the time. And I think that we're not communicating as often as we could. And I say this a lot, but it's about connection. It's not about convincing in conversation. And so I was writing about this topic for an article for Best Holistic Life magazine. And the article actually doesn't come out for a few months, but I had I just loved writing this article. And I was like, you know what? This needs to be a podcast also. And I don't know if you're like me, but I love learning. So I love it when I can listen to a podcast, or maybe you're watching this on YouTube and I can read an article. So it's nice to have a lot of different forms of information. So if you're like me, then you'll like all of it. You'll like listening, you'll like watching, and you'll like reading the article. But like I said, these 8 tips are really speed bumps. Hopefully you listen to these and maybe a few speak to you where you're like, oh yeah, I really want to focus and work on these 2 or these 3 or this one. But the idea is just to give you some perspective, to get the wheels turning a little bit, to get you thinking about what you're talking about a little bit more. And like I said, practice, right? So it's not always, the cool thing about what I love about communication and our words and the way we connect with others is like, as we are on our healing journey and we're learning and we're growing and we're evolving, naturally the way that we communicate is going to change and evolve too. And so see this as an inevitable process and a beautiful thing, an opportunity for connection, an art of conscious communication. So let's jump into these 8 tips, or these 8 speed bumps, these 8 points. The first one is the magnet theory. And I'll talk to you about that a little bit. But basically, the question you ask yourself here is, where did my communication style come from? Okay, so the chances are that you modeled the way you were communicated to, or maybe even not communicated to, whether it's the people that you were raised by, your parents, caregivers, teachers, coaches, etc., relatives. And we saw a certain style of communication when we were growing up, right? And this magnet theory is actually something that we talked about at my seminar that I did with Aubrey. That was the Voice of Impact seminar, a 2-day in-person seminar to up-level your communication, to amplify your influence, and to understand more of your communication patterns. And so this is something that we came up with and we talked about at the seminar, this magnet theory, right? So if you think of a magnet, there's one side that completely attracts to each other, right? Like I think of magnets in like science class or whatever, where you have like the bare magnets, and on one side, they're completely drawn to one another, while the other is repelled, right? You try to push that side of the magnet together and it just doesn't connect, right? So the magnet theory is basically saying, you're either going to completely model and be the exact same as the way that you were raised and really be drawn to that same style of communication, or you might want to be completely opposite of it, right? Maybe you grew up with a lot of yelling and kind of aggressive communication in your home, and now maybe you're doing the exact same thing, or maybe you're doing the exact opposite, right? And maybe it's a little bit of both, right? Maybe you realized at some point, oh my gosh, this is exactly like the way I was raised, the way that, my family did it, or people that I was raised by did it. And I don't want to be that way. So I'm going to flip the magnet and I'm going to choose to be different, right? So there's kind of a variety of gray area when it comes to this magnet, but you might be completely the same and completely drawn in and completely attracted to some of the communication style that you, were, that was modeled to you. And you could also be the complete opposite. And I had a guest on my podcast, Dr. Tanya Stevenson, who I love. She's super sweet. And we were talking about a lot of different things. But one of the things that came up was a moment when she was with her partner. And I think they were having people over at their house, or they were at some sort of gathering with others. And her partner either did or didn't do something that upset her. And she completely gave him the silent treatment. And she had this moment of awareness that she shared where it was like, oh, I am giving my partner the silent treatment because that's what my mom did to my dad. But actually, I don't want to be that person. I love connection. I love communication. I actually want to flip that magnet a little bit. And I loved that story and that conversation with her because it really highlighted that point that, like, when we start to think about, okay, where did my communication style come from? We could get super pissed and angry. And because you modeled this, now that's the way that I am, and blah, blah, blah. It's not always to like justify it. It's just to understand it, right? You could also justify it and be like, well, my mom yelled and my dad yelled, so now I yell, and that's just the way that I am, right? But we could also decide that I'm just going to understand it. I'm not going to justify it and stay the same. I'm just going to understand it, right? So this first point, this first one is just asking yourself, where did my communication style come from? Who might I have modeled? Who was around me growing up? How did they communicate? How did they not communicate? Just understanding that a little bit more will help with slowing down the autopilot and turning off the cruise control, because then you'll be able to be like, oh, that's where that might have come from. Okay, how can I dig a little bit deeper to understand that and to make it mean something, bigger and better than myself? So that's the first one. Where did my communication style come from? And where am I in that kind of magnet theory space? When I think of myself, I can think of many areas where I'm like, okay, I'm the same as my family here, and I like it, right? Like I think of my Italian heritage and us talking with our hands and sometimes getting loud and passionate. I like that. But then there were other areas where I realized, oh man, I'm doing that thing that my family does that I just don't like, that doesn't drive connection, that isn't going to help me go deeper in relationships. It's more like just putting up this block here. And I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm going to flip that magnet, right? So maybe your wheels are turning and you're thinking about ways that you are the same, that you're different, or maybe that you evolve to be different or evolve to be the same. Just thinking about it. Where did it come from? That's the first one. Number 2, it's time to listen. And this, I'm speaking to myself definitely, because I generally lean more towards talking and giving advice and not always having on my autopilot, listen. Right? I feel like meditation has helped me get a lot better at this because it's helped me become more present and more aware and more focused on one particular thing in the present moment. So I feel like the more that I meditate, actually, the more it benefits some of these conversations I'm having because I can sit and be present, right? So when I say listen, I really mean like active listening, like truly listening to the person and seeing how that can be a transformative experience for yourself and for others. So hearing the words spoken, hearing the tonality, paying attention to the nonverbal communication, and just being there actively listening and an active participant in the conversation. even if you're just sitting there and listening and, giving your eye contact and affirming body language that you're there in that space is so powerful. So when we create that feeling for the other person that they're listening, that person's present, right? We're not on our phone. We're not like, yeah, and not paying attention. We create this space of like safety for the other person of like, oh, I can open up. I can share. This person's listening. This person wants to hear me express my feelings and what's coming up for me. And so, remembering that it can be time to listen is number 2. Number 3, be you. So in conscious conversation, in conscious communication, it's really, really awesome and powerful to prioritize authenticity. In the beginning, it can feel kind of awkward, especially if you're switching your communication style, the words you want to be using. Sometimes it can feel a little like proper and poetic as you're like figuring out what authentic communication is for you. Sometimes it can just feel a little robotic, a little uncomfortable, and you want to practice and kind of try it on a little bit, right? So like for me, I say fuck, I cuss. Not a ton, but I do. And that's part of my authentic communication. Something I'll say to my friends when we're having tough conversations is I'll say like, feel free to tell me to fuck off or tell me I'm wrong, right? Because I want to leave that space for like dialogue and not like, I know the answers and you should do this, right? So I noticed, okay, sometimes I'll lean into giving advice if the person wants advice. Sometimes I'll really lean into that. But then I like to say like, and, tell me I'm fucking crazy or tell me to fuck off, because that style of communication is authentic to me. When we had the Voice of Impact seminar that I was talking about in Colorado for 2 days, I said fuck probably within the first couple hours. And you could tell everybody in the room resonated with that. It was like, oh, if Lunden can just speak, consciously, but from a space that feels authentic, then we all can. And actually everybody in the seminar, all the women had said, they were like, I loved that freedom that you created within this space just by saying fuck, So whatever that might be like for you, maybe you like humor. The region of California that I come from, we say hella a lot. So I'll say hella, like that was hella cool, or I was hella into that, And so there's a style of communication that can be authentic from where you come from, the way you were raised, maybe something that your ethnic background says, and you just like to throw it out there. I think of too, like in my Italian side of the family, my great grandma and my relatives will often say Madonna, which is basically like, I don't even know how I would give a definition of that. In fact, in my brain, when I was about to give you a definition of what Madonna means, I was going to give you another Italian word. Anyways, it's basically just like, here we go again, Madonna, And so that is very authentic too. And when I'm around my family, I'll start to use some of that in conversation. So like, be you, use word choices and flair and style and a vibe that works for you. Okay. Embrace that vulnerability of being who you are. You might not speak to everybody, right? Conscious communication is not your ability to like have everybody resonate with everything that comes out of your mouth, but just being more aware of it. So I think that having that authentic style, flavor is really powerful and awesome. And I love working with clients on this specifically, especially in those practice rounds of like, I want to say this, but how would I say that in a way that feels very authentic, very like me? That's number 3. Number 4, turn off the advice autopilot. Now, like I said before in the it's time to listen, I'm speaking to myself here as well, because I found myself on advice autopilot. I think just because of the coaching that I do and the frequency that people ask for advice, I sometimes automatically assume that when someone shares something with me, they want my input, right? But not everybody wants advice. Some people just want you to be present and to listen and to hold that space, right? So I developed this acronym actually with a group of women at a retreat that I co-hosted back in 2018. And we created this acronym SEA, like sea, like the ocean, and saying, what do you want? Silence, empathy, or advice? And being able to have this dialogue with people that we love, that we connect with, where we can ask them, hey, do you want silence? Do you want me to just be quiet and listen? Do you want empathy? Like, do you want me to feel with you? Or do you want advice? Like, do you want me to listen so I can give you my input? And let the person tell you what they want. They might just be like, oh, you know what? I'm not ready for advice yet or input. I just want to share and I just want to get this off my chest and I just want to like cry and feel a little bit, right? Or they might be like, actually, no, Lunden, I want your advice. Please give me your advice. Then you know with which ears to listen to as well. When you decide, okay, I'm going to turn off the advice autopilot. I'm going to ask the person for what they might need and, give that to them. And then also vice versa, right? As the conscious communicator that you're becoming, when you start to open up to someone, you can actually say, hey, I need your advice here. Or, hey, I don't want your advice. I just want to talk and get it all out. So you can also kind of switch those roles there. That's number 4. Turn off the advice autopilot. Number 5, choose your words wisely. This is why I think practice is so important. I can't tell you how many tough conversations I've had with people that I love that I've either messed up royally because I just didn't choose my words wisely. I was just letting the autopilot come out, saying all the things, no filter. And then I've had the other end of the spectrum too, where and I shared this at our seminar too. I'm like, sometimes I just go for walks with my headphones in and I just put my headphones in and I walk around and I talk to myself and I practice having the tough conversations. And then I keep the headphones in because then if I'm walking and someone passes by, they're not like, oh, is she talking to herself? They think I'm on the phone, right? It's genius. But choose your words wisely and don't be afraid to practice, especially as you're working on, authentically communicating in a way that resonates with you. Being able to practice and choose our words wisely is really, really powerful. And I love embracing the do-over, right? If somebody wants to do over in communication with me, I like to welcome that, presuming it hasn't happened so many times that I need to set a boundary, right? And vice versa. So being able to choose our words wisely, but then be able to be like, hey, I need a do-over. I'm super sorry that I said those words. I want to try again. Will you allow me to try again? Right? And in some situations we can do that, but that saying like sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. I just think that's total bullshit because words can actually really hurt. And we can say things sometimes that we can't take back. And we might have lessons we can think about where we're like, oh yeah, I didn't choose my words wisely. And that completely destroyed or ended that relationship or that friendship. And maybe you got a do-over and maybe you didn't. And maybe you just got to learn from not choosing your words wisely, So practice makes perfect, or practice just makes better. I guess there's no such thing as perfect, and we're not looking for perfect communication, but think about what you say before you say it, especially if it's a tough conversation, especially if it's a person that you care about. And, choose your words wisely. Practice. Number 6. Hey, really quick, I want to interrupt the podcast for just a minute to tell you about one of my favorite supplements for hair, skin, nails, digestive, and gut health. And that is Snap Supplements Super Greens with collagen. Now, if you're following me on social media, you've probably seen me post about this a bunch because honestly, this product tastes amazing and it's jam-packed with nutrients, like I said, to support healthy hair, skin, and nails. It helps support detoxification, a healthy immune system, and there's even probiotics in there for a healthy gut. It's non-GMO, no sugar added, soy-free, grass-fed collagen, and every scoop is going to give you 7 grams of protein. And this is why I love it, because it's not like a protein shake. It's just a scoop of powder. It tastes amazing. I put it in water, or if I want more hydration, I'll put it in coconut water and mix it up. And it's like having a nice, refreshing beverage that's packed with a bunch of super greens and protein. So what I'm super excited about is that for listening to the podcast, you'll get this discount here, nowhere else, but for listening to the podcast. You can save 25% off on all your Snap supplement purchases, including the Super Greens with collagen. And you do that by using code Lunden25 at checkout. That's LUNDEN 25. LUNDEN to get 25% off at checkout. You can shop on snapsupplements.com or you can shop on my website, lifelikeLondon.com/supplements. And you'll see there's already an additional 10% taken off. But you, because you're a podcast listener, you're going to get 25% off when you use the code Lunden25 at checkout. LUNDEN 25 at checkout to get your Snap supplements, super greens, and collagen, and all your Snap supplements for 25% off. Now, let's get back to the show. We are all human and we want to be heard. So we have an opportunity to, in communication, like recognize our common humanity, right? And we break down these walls of judgment and create a space where empathy can flourish and we can have these deep, powerful conversations. We'll start to understand, and you'll feel this yourself, and with communicating with other people too, like we all have our own set of experiences, struggles, triumphs, great things, highs, lows, and we all want to be heard. We all want to feel like what we say matters and what we want to convey is important. And so we can look at that from both ends of the spectrum. It's like just as much as we want to be heard and we have this human need that wants to connect, that wants to feel validated, other people want that too. And so I know some of these tips might cross over with one another, like, being willing to listen, turn off the advice autopilot, and just remembering, like, as I'm navigating my pain and the toughness of my life and also the beauty of my life, other people are doing the same too. And we want to be seen, heard, and validated in our experiences. So when we're having these conversations, remember that, like, they're human too. This is another person too, with feelings and with, all the internal structures of reality like I have, and they have their own unique way also. So just remember, people want to be validated. They want to be heard. They want to know that their feelings matter when they're connecting and they're communicating with you. And so that's a very powerful one. Number 7, nonverbal communication. Our body language, our facial expressions, our gestures, they all convey lots of information, right? Even without saying any words. And being attuned and more aware of our nonverbal communication and the nonverbal communication of others allows us to communicate with more sensitivity, more understanding, and we can start to become a little bit aware of our nonverbal communication, right? We might be saying one thing or, be listening, but then we're like on our phone or we're closed off or we're turned away or whatever, right? We might have a look on our face that's a look of like, I don't want to be here, whatever, right? So just be aware of some of that nonverbal communication. I remember, a friend of mine was visiting and came over, and I was at my parents' house, and she mentioned that she was going to this one park. And me and my mom, we both, I guess, had the same facial expression and we weren't aware of it. And not that this was like a bad moment for communication, but I remember she was like, oh, by the looks of your guys' face, that's probably not the best park I should be going to. But in my mind, I was like, oh, I wasn't purposely making a facial expression that was expressing what I was feeling internally. And not that we should like wear a mask, but I think the reason why I share that story is because sometimes our face and our body is making expressions that we're not aware of because we always do them. And so it's nice to just be aware of our body language when we're connecting and when we're in conversation. Mirroring and matching is a great tool, right? Like when you want to connect and one person is sitting down, it's nice to sit down next to them. If they're leaning back, you lean back, right? It's, if you can think of the conversation dynamic, if somebody's standing up and looking down on the person and then the other person sitting down looking up at the person, it doesn't really create a dynamic for connection. So sometimes in those nonverbals in our body language, we can sometimes just mirror and match that situation. We can sit down, we can relax if they're relaxed, we can cross our legs if their legs are crossed. It doesn't have to be so obvious and so robotic, but it's a great way to build that rapport and deepen that connection in conversation with people that we know, with people that we don't know. It's just a great tool to have, mirroring and matching to create more of that connection in that conversation, more consciousness in that conversation. I think it's helpful to be aware of our body language a little bit more, especially when we're going to be having those tough conversations, right? When we want to be in that space of having a challenging conversation, but also be calm and collected and deliver that message in the way that we want to. It's going to be helpful to develop a body posture and choose nonverbal communication that's a bit more relaxed, a bit more in tune with the vibe you want to bring to the conversation, if that makes sense. That also takes practice too. And sometimes, when we have close friends and people that we communicate with regularly, we can ask them like, how was my nonverbal communication? Or if a friend says something like, oh, what do you mean? Like the look on your face. And you're like, wait, what was the look on my face? I didn't mean that actually. So help me figure out what the look on my face is so that I can improve my nonverbal communication, right? Number 8, texting and DMs. Okay, this is a little bit different than in-person communication, right? So in the digital age, where a lot of our communication happens through screens, through our phones, through DMs, through messaging, conscious communication can really take on new dimensions, right? Really making sure that you are conscious with your words, that you're saying what you mean, that you are, you have the option to like read it and delete it before you send it, right? So in that process of practicing or whatever, texting and DMs, in theory, should have more time in between. We don't need to respond right away if we need some time to think about it or whatever, but we do, right? We have this kind of autopilot of going back and forth on DMs and text messages and things like that. And so I think what I want to share here is, first of all, you can't ever assume what somebody's tonality is when connecting and communicating with them on a text or a DM. I was messaging with a close friend of mine a few weeks ago, and she said something like, okay, I was just trying to help. You don't have to be so snappy. And I was like, wait, I wasn't even snappy, at least in my tonality of text, right? And her needing to uncover whatever might be, within her that made her think I was snappy or whatever, right? Maybe I am snappy to her. Maybe in person, we talk and we kind of snap back to each other. So when I'm texting, maybe she somehow hears my voice. That's totally possible. Maybe there's something that she needs to unpack because she thought I was automatically being snappy, right? Like there's just a lot that goes on between texts and DMs that we have to be mindful of. So here I would say, text and DM, be mindful of the words that you're choosing. And then also never hesitate to like pick up the phone or hop on Zoom. Sometimes it's nice just to be like, wait, let's clarify that on a video call really quick, or let's clarify that on a phone call. Because the last thing we want is our conversations or what we're saying to be interpreted the wrong way, especially if we can help it, right? Like sometimes we might say something and the person might completely take it out of context. We couldn't have, remedied it even if we tried, right? But then it's another thing to like be able to, just kind of look back at, I don't know what I was going to say there. Anyways, it could be one thing to I kind of lost my train of thought in that space a little bit. I'm excited for it to come back. But we might be in this autopilot of communicating, texting, whatever, saying what we need to back and forth. People are going to react their way, even with our most intentional words sometimes. And if you can help it, I think this is what I was going to say. If you sense that something's kind of off, or the person might not have received it, or the message just didn't land in the way that you intended it, never hesitate to pick up the phone and call the old-fashioned way, or say, hey, let's hop on FaceTime. Hey, let's hop on a video call, just so that we can clarify that we're on the same page a little bit. Because conscious communication takes practice and compassion and grace for yourself too, right? So if you feel like, wait, I need to pick up the phone and like clarify that a little bit, be a little bit more conscious, you can do that. So let's go through these 8 tips for conscious communication before we wrap this up and kind of land the plane here. Number 1, the magnet theory. Where did my communication style come from? Number 2, it's time to listen. Number 3, be you, right? Find that authentic version of words coming out of your mouth. Number 4, turn off the advice autopilot. Number 5, choose your words wisely and practice. Number 6, we are all human and we want to be heard. We want to be validated. We want to connect in conversation. Number 7, nonverbal communication, right? Paying attention to our facial expressions and what we might be doing or signaling without words. And then number 8, being mindful of our texting and our DMs and not being afraid to just give people an old-fashioned ring, talk to them on the phone or hop on a video call so that you can clarify things a little bit more. And yeah, those are the 8 tips for mindful communication and conscious communication, conscious conversations. Maybe something in particular stood out to you where you're like, oh yeah, number 2, I'm just going to work on that one. Maybe there's a few others that have spoken to you, but yeah, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram. I love connecting and hearing any ways that these episodes might have spoken to you. I'm at Life Like Lunden on Instagram, and then we are at Self Love and Sweat on Instagram as well. You can hit us up on either of those pages. And yeah, just go out and use your words, conversate consciously, do what you can to just make small, subtle shifts to help people feel more connected to you, to make it about less convincing and more about connection. And yeah, thanks for being here at this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Self Love and Sweat, the podcast. Hey, do me a favor. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, give us a review. This really helps a lot. And share this with a friend. I'm only one person, and with your help, we can really spread the message of self-love and sweat and change more lives all around the world. I'm Lunden Souza, reminding you that you deserve a life full of passion, presence, and purpose, fueled by self-love and sweat. This podcast is a Hit Spot Austria production.